What else have you kind of seen change and shift in terms of equipment and maybe just attitude to the equipment in the last 10 years or so that you've been in the sport?
I think people's positions have changed a lot, obviously. Like even you look back to riders like Tony Martin in the TT, when you've got sort of fairly stock extensions for time trials, now everything is sort of hyper customized, and for the most part, people are riding a sort of higher but maybe slightly more compact position to get their shoulders into a good position too. Obviously, the helmets, you've started to see things like the new Giro Arrowhead, so the super wide TT lids that are going to sort of shroud your shoulders more. Obviously, a big development there. Yeah, the trickle down of tech into skin suits as well. Obviously, we have the aero base layer that's been used sort of pretty prevalently in the World Tour, but this dual layer technology has been on the track for a few Olympic cycles now. That is starting to become obviously much more widespread now on the road too, just as the knowledge sort of permeates into just how good these suits are.
Yes, the positions have definitely changed a lot. I find myself going back looking at the TTs, even like the Olympic TT from 2012, even maybe 2016, with like Fabian Cancellara was one of the other riders that has just like flat TT bars, head up, and just power through it.
Yeah.
It's insane to go back and compare those kind of positions.
Yeah, you've got that sort of the yo-yo between sort of that it went from that to sort of get as low as possible, and then that transition into actually a lot of stack height can be more beneficial. I think sort of people obviously thinking be as small and narrow as possible was going to be the most effective thing, but quite often that's not the case. Like, and then as well factoring in sort of it's watts per unit of drag. So even if you're going into a tunnel and finding out just how airy you can be, if that's going to compress your rib cage so you can't breathe as well, the amount of power you've been able to produce is going to reduce. So it's about striking that happy medium between can I put out the maximum amount of power for the least amount of drag?
Is that something you were thinking about back in 17, 18, 19 when you were starting out, that positions might change quite a lot? Were you, when you were designing and making these clothes, were you thinking about how they were going to be used on the bike?
Yeah, the it's a weird one. We had this wingsuit. I don't know if you remember it.
I
It was
do.
like the first suit we ever bought out because the whole idea was like, hey, we don't really need to pay attention to the UCI rules. We're just going to make something to see if it was quick. And by comparison to what we can do now, the the level of sort of knowledge that we could put into it was nowhere near as good as what we can do now. Like the fabrics were bad, the fit was not particularly good. But when we were testing that in the tunnel, um, it was really interesting to see how head position affected it. Because when we try sort of super low tucked in head positions, the performance drops like quite bad. Whereas like a slightly higher than neutral head position worked really well with it because it needed a certain amount of airflow through the torso to sort of keep the wings sort of in line. So yeah, there was really interesting things like that. I think it sort of hyper exaggerated how your position impacts your suit. And I think, yeah, it's socks, aero socks are probably the only equipment choice that we've seen that is sort of a universal benefit. Like there aren't many sort of universal guarantees that something will make you faster when it comes to kit besides aero socks. Like the rate of how good they'll be on you might change, but suits can be sort of very dependent on your position as well. So yeah, it's really interesting to see. Like whenever you go to the wind tunnel, it's one of those frustrating things. Like you go in with a certain amount of questions you want to answer, and you always come out with more.